This is the story of Kirsten Lobato, who was wrongfully convicted of murder and spent 16 years in prison for a crime she did not commit. At the age of 18, Lobato was accused of brutally murdering a homeless man in Las Vegas. She was initially found guilty of first-degree murder, but upon retrial, she was convicted of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 13 to 45 years in prison. After serving 16 years behind bars, new evidence was presented during a hearing that confirmed the actual day of the victim's death was when Lobato was 3 hours away with her family. This evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Lobato could not have possibly committed the crime she was convicted of. Finally, Lobato was released from prison and is seen in the picture outside for the first time as a free woman.
I feel overwhelmed, I feel excited, I feel grateful, I'm so happy.
It is worth noting that Lobato has filed a lawsuit against the Las Vegas Police Department and is currently awaiting compensation for the years she spent wrongfully imprisoned. This is the story of Ricky Jackson, who spent over 39 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit. At the age of 18, Jackson was living in Cleveland, Ohio, when he was arrested for the crime. The main witness in the case was a 12-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon, who claimed to have seen the murder. However, in truth, Vernon never actually saw anything, and he later confessed that the police had coerced him into testifying against Jackson. Despite the lack of evidence, Jackson was initially sentenced to death by electrocution. He spent 2 years on death row before his sentence was commuted to life in prison. For almost 4 decades, Jackson maintained his innocence, fighting for justice and a chance to clear his name. Finally, after 39 years, the truth came to light when Eddie Vernon, now 52 years old, stepped forward and admitted that he had never seen the murder take place. With this new evidence, the charges against Jackson were dropped.
Mr. Jackson, you're going to be free to go. Life is filled with small victories, and this is a big one. I wish you good luck.
And he was declared a free man. The moment Jackson heard the news that he was finally being released from prison after so many years of wrongful imprisonment was undoubtedly an emotional one. After spending nearly 4 decades of his life behind bars, Jackson was now outside for the first time as a free man. He received $1 million in compensation from the state for his wrongful conviction, as well as an additional $2.65 million for the income he had lost during his time in prison. Despite the injustice he faced, Jackson's story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of fighting for the truth. This is the story of Daniel Villegas, a man who spent 18 years in prison for a double homicide he did not commit in El Paso, Texas. Villegas was just 16 years old when he was arrested, and according to reports, he was threatened with beatings and the death penalty by an El Paso detective if he did not confess to the crime. Under this pressure, Villegas signed a confession that had been prepared by the detectives. A few hours later, he tried to retract his statement, but it was too late. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, and the false confession was the only evidence the jury had to consider. However, they were unable to reach a verdict. Villegas was granted a retrial, and this time the jury found him guilty, sentencing him to life in prison. For the next 18 years, Villegas remained in prison until his verdict was finally thrown out, and he was released on bond. During this time, he started a family and got married. However, his future remained uncertain as he awaited his 3rd trial. It was during this trial that Villegas finally learned that he would be going home to his family as a free man.
Verdict Form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of...
Today, Villegas has reportedly filed a lawsuit against the city of El Paso. Although he has been compensated for the time he lost behind bars, he will never get back the 18 years he spent away from his loved ones. This is the story of Luis Vargas. Luis Vargas spent over 16 years in prison for crimes that he did not commit. At the age of 29, he was living in Los Angeles, California when he was charged with 3 sexual assaults. The police determined that it was the same person who had committed all 3 attacks, based on the similarity of the crime descriptions. Vargas was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 55 years to life in prison. However, the California Innocence Project later conducted a DNA test on the remaining physical evidence and clothing from one of the victims, which was not a match to Vargas. This proved his innocence.
He is in fact innocent because the evidence will show that undermines the prosecution's case.
And he was exonerated from all crimes. During the moment of his exoneration, Vargas remained silent. Throughout his time in prison, Vargas had one simple wish from his mother for when he would become a free man.
Please buy me a big hamburger and we eat it together.
After his exoneration, it is unclear whether he was able to fulfill this wish. Reportedly, Vargas received $886,760 in state compensation for his wrongful conviction and imprisonment. This is the story of Susan Mellon, who was wrongfully sentenced to life in prison without parole based on a false testimony. At the time of her arrest in Los Angeles, California, she was a 42-year-old mother taking her daughter to get a Happy Meal at McDonald's. However, this innocent trip to the fast food restaurant marked the end of her freedom, as she was accused of murdering her ex-boyfriend. Susan Mellon's conviction was solely based on the testimony of an informant who claimed that Mellon had confessed the killing to her. This untruthful testimony resulted in Mellon spending 17 years behind bars, separated from her daughter. But eventually, the informant was proven to be a pathological liar and an unreliable witness. After this revelation, Mellon's case was finally overturned.
Judgment is vacated, the conviction is overturned, and as to Ms. Mellon, the case is dismissed.
And she was released from prison. Mellon was overwhelmed with emotions, crying one moment and jumping for joy the next. After her release, Mellon's first priority was to take her daughter to McDonald's to finally have the Happy Meal they were supposed to get years ago. The state of California awarded Mellon $597,000 in compensation for the years she spent wrongfully imprisoned. Moreover, the Los Angeles City Council agreed to pay Mellon a settlement of $12 million. This is the story of David Ranta, a man who was wrongfully convicted of murder and spent 22 years in prison in Brooklyn, New York. Ranta's case involves Detective Louis Scarcella, who was involved in numerous other wrongful convictions. Ranta was identified as the shooter in a police lineup run by Scarcella, and he was later convicted and sentenced to 37.5 years to life in prison. However, decades later, a key witness revealed that Scarcella had provided him with a description of whom to pick in the lineup, and the evidence presented to the jury was allegedly fabricated. Despite the lack of physical evidence linking Ranta to the crime, he spent over 2 decades in prison until the former witnesses admitted that they were pressured into testifying against him. Finally, Ranta's conviction was thrown out.
Mr. Ranta, to say that I'm sorry for what you have endured would be an understatement and grossly inadequate, but I say it to you anyway. The defendant's motion to vacate the judgment of conviction is granted.
And he walked out of prison a free man, hugging his family with all he owned thrown over his back. Following his release, Ranta reportedly received $2 million from the state and a $6.4 million settlement from the city of New York. John Bunn, a resident of Brooklyn, New York, spent an incredible 27 years of his life wrongfully convicted of murder. At the tender age of 14, he was taken into custody by the NYPD detective, Louis Scarcella, and yes, this is another wrongful conviction that's connected to Scarcella. Following his arrest, Bunn spent 16 years behind bars and another 11 years out on parole, during which he never gave up the fight to prove his innocence.
I'm an innocent man, Your Honor, and I have always been an innocent man.
Eventually, he was granted relief from his conviction due to the misconduct of Detective Scarcella, who lacked even probable cause to arrest Bunn in the first place. After more than 2.5 decades of struggling to clear his name, he was finally exonerated. Bunn had a moment with the judge before leaving the courtroom after his exoneration. He later filed a lawsuit against the city of New York and Detective Scarcella. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos of courtroom moments and reactions and much more. Check out this video and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.